This story is called Redmund the Great. It all started when a dark shadow crossed the pages of my book as I was reading on my bench in Riverside Park, New York City. I assumed, of course, that a pterodactyl had come for me at last. But in fact, a big rock-like monster of a red-tailed hawk had sailed over me with lethal speed to plummet to ground beyond a low elderberry bush. There was a heart-rending shriek from some poor creature out of sight on the far side. This was too much. I know nature is red in tooth and claw, although I haven't read any Tennyson in years, and there is no choice but to accept it. We're all here because of it. We are the survivors. Our senses, which we love so much, have been sharpened by its relentless honing. All kinds of predator-prey mayhem is perpetrated all day and all night in the ordinary course of life and death and throughout history, even in the Riverside Park oasis, and spilling into the urban streets. Nobody bothers themselves about it. But accepting it in general and idlingly permitting it in a specific case are two different things. I'm not going to sit there and endure the horrific squeaking away of the life breath of a fellow creature, no matter the evolutionary justice of it. I flung my Voltaire aside and sprinted through the brush to behold the great Oz-dwelling monkey bird with its Megatherian claws clenched around the bodily fuselage of a squealing gray squirrel. The hawk was preparing to make off with that poor Silurian soul. Silurine, that's squirrel talk for of or relating to squirrels. It's one of those definitive words, meaning that it encompasses everything squirrel and nothing, for example, about pig or bear or dog. It means exactly what it means. I knew what would follow that aerial kidnapping, a ritualistic puncturing and dismemberment in some unassailable arboreal haunt. But not on my watch. As the hawk sensed my approaching interference, it extended its wings and started to flap heavily with its squirming treasure. At waist height, I palmed the monster under its armpits and drug it backwards. The hawk itself squalled and dropped its prize and began to struggle mightily until I let it go, though I would have allowed it to elevate me to its own realm for the final denu if I had to, in order to make things right up there, whatever the cost. The hawk continued to squawk as it lumbered up to an overhead limb, whence it stared down at me with unwavering hatred. "Welcome to the justice of the jungle," I stared back. Still on the ground at my feet, frozen in terror, was Mr. Squirrel. You know whether squirrels are male or female, because, as the saying goes, they aren't wearing any clothes. Gradually, he pulled himself together and clambered off toward the trunk of a big pin oak. He knew, as I knew, that he was safe there. In fact, normally, squirrels are actually cocky around hawks, which they love to taunt by ratcheting around trunks and limbs just out of reach for any number of hours that a hawk might choose to be mocked. It was only by force of the stealthy, perfidious approach behind the cover of the elderberry bush that this particular hawk had got the drop. As I later learned, squirrel society is set up in order to prevent exactly that. After finally pulling himself together, the squirrel glanced up to my eye height and examined me quizzically, as if to say, though I wasn't yet ready to put words in his mouth, "No kidding. Who would have thought it?" Anyway, that was the beginning of my friendship with Redmund. And after years of sharing my bench with no one, and not even wanting to, I now had a companion. He joined me each day, and when I wasn't actually reading, the two of us contemplated the Olmsted-supplied dioramic view of pond with reeds, ring of oaks and beeches, the grassy area with the bush where Redmund had been ambushed, the glinting river beyond. At first I thought Redmund was simply resting and relaxing after his ordeal. That's what I was doing with my reading, and of course continuing my struggle up the invisible stairway to the great vault of understanding above. But gradually I came to see that Redmund was actually doing much more than that. He was ruling, not me. The scattering of squirrels in the area around us were actually subjects of Redmund. He was observing them, directing them, protecting them, tending to them. He now had a more elevated and sturdy stanchion from which to do it, guarded in turn by me, the Batman of Silurian salvation. With a subtle dictionary of bodily signals and chirps and chortles of various sorts, Redmund was warning his minions of approaching danger, pointing them towards buried treasure, settling their squabbles. There was a whole language and culture. Siluranese, I called it. Redmund, from his bench height, could assess the intentions of a distant dog on a leash and communicate with clucks and purrs any necessary retreat strategies to the various scampering and playing innocents in our clearing. Could that dog break free from its owner? Could it crunch a careless, gambolling malingerer? Or is that dog a bird dog? Doesn't care about varmints. In which case, we keep on looking for nuts. No time lost. It was all right there in the language. I did come to know that many of the squirrels visible from my bench were, in fact, Redmund's wives and children. Let's not enforce a hard line on polygamy here. The squirrel world has different mores. Many of the youngsters practicing their jumps and flips had Redmund's distinctive markings. I should have mentioned that Redmund himself was easily recognizable from the magnificent russet red color of his whiskered cheeks and the rufous-tinted backs of his ankles and wrists. His chest, of course, was snowy white, and his miniature mule-like ears were constantly interrogating the distance for clues. I can hardly bear to tell you about Redmund's grand, billowing tail and his expressive dark eyes. I felt like I was favored by a noble presence disguised in relatively pedestrian trappings. Nobody would suspect a higher power to appear diminutively in a suit of gray with alertly twitching wiry black whiskers, and yet I felt that one had. And it wasn't just my bench, its position or height, that Redmund valued. It was me. I knew early on that our relationship was going to endure when my usual bench was occupied one day by a dissolute fellow pretending to read either Gravity's Rainbow or Ulysses, judging only from the thickness of the tome and his lack of absorption in it. And Redmund took the trouble to foot it the 50 yards down the asphalt path to claim his spot with me on my temporary bench. Speaking of languages, as it happened, that first day when I met Redmund, I was just at that part of Candide at which Martin, the hard-luck Woody Guthrie-like philosopher, is regaling our hero with the inevitability of human depravity and misfortune, how it's all akin to the certainty that hawks will eat pigeons, quote, wherever they find them. That's a quote. Partout où il les trouve. A quote. Lord knows why a man can't be satisfied with digging deeper and deeper into the subtleties of his own received tongue, rather than looking for a clearer picture elsewhere. I surely don't know. This seemed spookily prescient at the time, but I later felt it was merely coincidental, as matters encountered in books so often are. Anyway, you looked at it, Voltaire or no Voltaire, written about or not, read it now or read it later, I would have to be considered a sitting, rushing, yelling refutation of Voltaire's Manichaean premise. I didn't mention that I had in fact uttered quite a blood-curdling Comanche yell as I spliced the elderberries toward who knew what kind of barbarity on the other side when I saved Redmund. I had perpetrated at least a local refutation of Voltaire's gloomy Gallic assumption. I had to point out, in all fairness, on my bench, "Not this time, bucko." No translation required. No need even to say it. I certainly didn't have to say it to Redmund, although for all I know, he was thinking something more Nietzschean like, "Hell, if the guy saved me once, he'll probably do it again. If he wants to be my bodyguard, then he's my bodyguard. I'll just stick with him." I couldn't help thinking, occasionally, during our days together, that Redmund was in fact watching over me, simply for a chance to return the favor. For all I know, he was as irrational as I was. Maybe he was keeping an eye out for dragons, whatever inhabited or threatened his deep Silurian mind. After all, Redmund was no doubt descended from those diminutive mammals who famously scurried around on the dinosaurian scene even before the big Yucatan comet. And I expect those toothy reptiles did not go quietly. Dragons were probably well embedded in his own semi-reptilian psyche. Plus, as we've seen, I was myself still worried about pterodactyls. Anyway, over the rest of that spring and summer, Redmund was by my side as I polished off Voltaire, choked down intermittent helpings of Kant, impervious to any translation, those, more of my unfinished Dante, and for the second time, all of Ross MacDonald. I will tell you that Voltaire is much more convincing in the original French, which, given a certain amount of schooling, I was able to transit more or less like a goose I once saw stolidly marching across thin ice with intermittent, powerful, collapsing breakthroughs, implosions, and rocketing recoveries. On that same theory, I waded through page after page of an Italian English face-facing page edition of Dante. For my 2 years of high school Latin, they may, if anything, have been misleading. But it was Sayurinese that I became most proficient in, the language of the squirrels. I eavesdropped on Redmund's conversations with his subjects and developed considerable insight. The various yucks and purrs with which he dispatched warnings and favors to his subjects. You might not notice any of that at first. We've already covered how acute were his assessments of approaching dogs, not to mention children, bikes, lovers, streaking fleers from unknown, real, or imagined pursuit. It was the completeness of his language and understanding that I envied. There were only a certain limited number of issues that could impinge on a squirrel in Riverside Park, and Redmund seemed to have a contented understanding of all of them. Once there was a minor invasion of light-colored, almost zebra-striped squirrels from the direction of 72nd Street. Redmund leaped from the green boards and rounded up a posse of savage rodents from his and several adjacent tribes and drove the hapless invaders into the unforgiving tunnels of the boat basin. There was never the slightest doubt as to what to do or how to proceed. I did allow Redmund to query me on various matters, which is really a way of conversing with myself, I admit, given, among other reasons, Redmund's limited interest in the matter. But I used him as a kind of Socratic interlocutor, criticizing and appreciating my ideas and adding points and counterpoints. It was an inner soliloquy made more immediate by his catalog of tolerant expressions. The morality of the war against the zebra-striped invaders, for instance. Is there nothing to worry about there? Is it simply the right of first refusal that validates the rufous-wristed to defend a given mini-fertile crescent in the park? Life in the park is, of course, life and death every day and night, for all of us in varying degrees. Redmund's nights were spent in the several basketball-sized leafy treetop nests that he himself routinely inspected. He also directed the reliefing of the nests if they were damaged by storms. The more I watched him send his minions for cover when the hawk was near, with a certain kind of prairie dog yip, the more amazed I became that he had even been caught out by that original redtail. That truly was a one-off, and, to tell the truth, a great piece of luck for me. By example, Redmund had trained his followers in the black art of deceptive nut concealment. He would pretend to bury a nut, elaborately patting it down, throwing leaves over the spot, only to conceal the actual nut in his cheek and bury it quickly and surreptitiously in another spot entirely. Some of that chuckling you hear in the park is squirrel laughing at the disappointment of an overly presumptuous nut robber who has been disabused of his illicit cleverness. There was also an even more advanced strategy of retreat worthy of Churchill's Art of Ungentlemanly Warfare. I noticed Redmund repeating over and over a neat escape route, always in exactly the same way. That is, always to the right of one limb, the left of another, around the back of a tree in the same place, a short jump skipping another, as if on a marked, curving mountain highway. He could go faster or slower, but the turns and stops were always the same. And then I noticed the hawk observing all this. Redmund was training the hawk to try to cut him off at a predictable interception point, whereas in an actual evacuation, none of the nestlings would flee by that route. The hawk would try to ambush based on a wrong idea. One day I realized that our relationship had changed. Maybe there was a clock on Redmund's obligation to me. Or maybe he had begun to think, sure, saving me from that hawk short-circuited a lot of trouble, but I would have got away eventually on my own anyway. In any case, there came a day when Redmund seemed to revert to something more in the line of ordinary park fauna, though be it I did have an inside track. Our special time was over. At first he seemed to be waving at me with his right paw. Then he approached on the bench and reached out with that same paw and tapped 3 times on my knee while meeting my gaze steadily. I happened to be munching on macadamia nuts at the time, and I placed one on the green board beside me. He picked it up, held it in both hands while rotating it rapidly and eviscerating it in narrow strips with his sharp teeth until all that remained on his fingers were sticky crumbs, which he then licked down with a surprisingly human, though miniature, pink tongue. Had our special relationship ended? Has his debt to me, if there had ever been one, been put paid by simple time? Was he now just an adorable pet begging for bodega food, which only I knew how to obtain? And now must I use that knowledge to purchase his present? Oh, he's so cute! For no certain reason, our new dynamic had been set. I now had a more ordinary friend. I decided on my own, based on parameters that I have now forgotten, that the proper offering on my side of this new dynamic was from the Zabar's Shelled Organic Walnut Pieces collection. I would always place the morsel on the board because of his sharp teeth, and only after Redmund solicited respectfully with the full 3 taps on the knee. You do have to watch out for those razor-sharp teeth. Doesn't matter how friendly he is, no matter the depth of your trust. Redmund understood the ritual completely and never tried to hurry the proceeding or cut out disrespectfully early after receiving his parcel. He often ate one offered nut in situ, so to speak, then would ask for another in good order for takeout. In this new transactional scheme, I got much less reading done and seemed to seek answers to fewer questions, frankly. I had to admit that some of the magic was gone. But we went on like that, diminished but mildly fulfilling, for many weeks. And then One day Redmund did not appear. After a week or so, I understood he was not going to appear. Maybe something happened to him. Maybe the hawk had upped his game. I've heard of hawks learning to work in concert in flushing prey. Maybe Redmund's reflexes had gotten slow from age or overconfidence. Or maybe Redmund had intuited that I myself was angling for a change. I knew the time had come for me to return to my native Tennessee. And Redmund had figured he would be the one to say a preemptive goodbye. The one who, as in the famous Pup the Magic Dragon song, came no more. So I was left alone on the bench for my last few days. The more so in that I felt I had completed most of my reading. Indeed, on my way to the airport, I had left most of my books behind, at least the ones not in English. I will say that on the West Side Highway on the way to the airport, I glanced at the athletic fields up north of 96th Street, and on a raised umpire's chair, I clearly saw the outline of a squirrel. He seemed to be contemplating and controlling the scene of play, on which several off-season squirrels were engaged in the usual frolicking and foraging. I could swear I could see a flash of russet red on his cheek as he turned to look at me and then turned back to the field of play. Could Redmund have ascended from the kingship of my local scene and now been elevated to the Siuran emperor of the entire Upper West Side? I wouldn't put it past him. There's even a very small chance he waved.